So we're running a little late. We'll try to keep our welcome brief for that regard, but I'm excited to see so much energy, and we were herding people in and, seeing people hug and be excited and greet each other. So it's great to be able to have convened this wonderful group of people. I have to say, this conference is sold out. Most of you probably know. We actually have way more people than we anticipated. Thank you. When we started planning a year ago, we thought, okay, we'll budget for 150 people. And we have about 350 people that we're anticipating being here over the next 2 days. So we kept going up and saying, well, all these people want to come, let's increase it. So thank you to you for making this conference. We could have been in a room talking to ourselves, but instead we're getting to meet all of you. Our steering committee has really been overwhelmed by the diverse group of people that wanted to be part of this discussion. We have people from government at all levels, nonprofit organizations, the private sector, farmers, philanthropists, students, a bunch of different students from different backgrounds that are going to be our next generation of leaders. We also have a brilliant group of food recovery entrepreneurs that we convened yesterday. We had so much energy. I'm happy that most of them stayed around, and for those who wanted to learn about that, there'll be a breakout session this afternoon so you can hear a little bit about what they talked about, what they're doing, and ask them. I know many people were interested in that, so I'm glad we're able to offer that many of them stayed. For those who don't know me, I should maybe start here. My name's Emily Broadleave, and I direct the Food Law and Policy Clinic here at Harvard Law School. Our clinic is a division of the Law School Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation, and we have our director in the corner, Robert Greenwald. And the clinic is an action learning program for law students to have a chance to serve clients and communities while learning about food law and practicing while they're law students and learning how to do this work for when they graduate. And we work on various issues at the intersection of food and law. And the past 5 years, we've gotten more and more engaged in food waste and food recovery. Many of you have seen our 2013 report, The Dating Game, which we did with the Natural Resources Defense Council. But as we've learned more about this space, we really realized what could be more crucial than, really every issue in the food system is impacted when we throw away a third to a half of the food we produce. So what could be a more crucial way to engage with this, to make sure that we're not harming the environment, to make sure that where food is safe and wholesome, we're getting it to people who need it. So that's why we've devoted so much energy and resources, and I know it's why so many of you are here, eager to go, working on this, getting reinvigorated to take it back to your own work. In planning for this conference, our clinic was joined by our co-sponsors and an incredible steering committee made up of members of the U.S. EPA, Mass Department of Environmental Protection, and Recycling Works in Massachusetts. And we began speaking about a year ago on this idea of hosting a conference, a gathering of focused on meeting the EPA and USDA food waste reduction goal of 50% by 2030. And we were thrilled at the opportunity to convene national stakeholders and get to talk about national issues and also highlight the great work going on in Massachusetts with the organics ban and around New England. So you'll get to hear about a lot of those things over the next few days. And as the conference title implies, we're going to focus on the top 2 tiers of the EPA food recovery hierarchy to really allow us to dig in deeper on that angle of reducing food waste and getting food to people. So I want to acknowledge our steering committee members who put in countless hours on phone calls, emails, planning the conference, reaching out to speakers, envisioning everything that you're going to get to experience the next few days. So let's have them stand when I call their name, actually. The first is Chris Beeling. Where's Chris? Okay, good. So Chris is with EPA in this region. Dale Carpenter from EPA. Tom O'Donnell from EPA. John Fisher from Mass DEP. And then from the Food Law and Policy Clinic, Ona Balkas. Where's Ona? Ona. And I want to take a moment to say Ona's been working with the clinic for 5 years, first as a student, and then as a fellow, and now as a senior fellow. And we are sad to say this is her last week here. This conference would not have been possible without her. So we wish her the best of luck, but I want to acknowledge what an incredible part of building this clinic she's been. And lastly, from our clinic, Christina Rice. I don't know where Christina is. We'll give her a round of applause. And she's running around organizing. Christina planned almost the entirety of yesterday's workshop. And I want to also acknowledge really quickly yesterday's workshop, which was also put on by Jose Alvarez from Harvard Business School, who did an amazing job yesterday. So we're going to have a great packed 2 days of panels. I want to highlight a few things, and then I'll introduce our other speakers to give welcomes and then kind of talk about some logistic issues. One thing I want to highlight is that since we have such a great cross-section of people here, in addition to the panels and speakers, we decided to put together these sort of cross-cutting working groups. So we want to ask you to really go to those working groups, engage with the topics, give your best ideas, and try to figure out if there's ways for those working groups to move forward some of the agenda items. So we chose those topics based on the USDA and EPA call to action, and also on input from many of you that I spoke with, or that our steering committee spoke with the past few months, that came up with ideas of, for example, one's on distribution logistics. So we know that when we get food to stores, there's thousands of trucks to take them there, but then once that food isn't going to be used at that store, where's all the distribution logistics to kind of get it to the next step? So they'll be on a bunch of different issues. We ask you to attend the same discussion both days, as they'll build on one another. So whichever one you choose to go to today after lunch, please go back again tomorrow, and we're all really excited to welcome you and get you thinking in those. I also wanted to report that due to the diligent efforts of our catering company, Restaurant Associates, and the work from Sustainable America, which has been incredible in working with our steering committee and our caterer, almost 100% of the food you'll eat over the next 2 days, including this breakfast, is rescued or recovered food that would have otherwise been wasted. So over the next 2 days, yes. Over the next few days, we're going to eat what we preach. I'm happy to report that. So I'm going to introduce now our speakers who we're really excited to have welcome us from the other co-sponsors of this event. First is Regional Administrator Kurt Spalding, who is the Regional Administrator here in Region 1 of the EPA. EPA is engaged on the issue of wasted food and food recovery nationally and has been an incredible partner here in New England, not just for this conference, but for a lot of the work that we've done. And we're really glad we had the support not only of EPA headquarters, but also of Region 1, Region 2, and Region 3 in putting together this conference. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Emily. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today. I'm here to welcome, which is fantastic. What a great place to have you come to. We're very proud to be here in Massachusetts, in New England, for the Reduce and Recover Safe Food for People Conference, working on those top two pieces of the hierarchy. Now, we've coordinated, as has been said, with our Region 2 and 3 colleagues, New York City and the Philadelphia regional offices, and of course with my great friend and conspirer in all kinds of things, Maddie Stanislaus from the EPA headquarters, Office of Land and Emergency Management. Maddie actually renamed it just, 6 months ago. So we're now in a very new era for that office. Now, Cambridge is the perfect location to highlight the issue of food waste reduction. Not only is it the home of many colleges, universities, and businesses, as you can see, this area is also known for its restaurants, long-standing food recovery, not-for-profits, and it prides itself on its residential curbside composting program, one of the few areas in the country that is launched in that area. And I stand here today with the Harvard Food Law Policy Clinic and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, who's been a fantastic partner during my time at EPA, and as co-sponsors of this event, and recognize each organization's energy and innovation around food recovery and organics management. Now, the mission of all three organizations align well with EPA's food recovery hierarchy. And this event focuses on the top two tiers of the hierarchy, source reduction and feeding people. Now, I can't think of a nobler goal than feeding our population and not wasting resources, water, energy, and labor to produce our nation's food supply. This conference will discuss the connection between hunger relief and environmental impacts, and I will defer to Maddie for a more detailed discussion of that later this morning. But we are all here because of the leadership of our partners in New England state government who have chosen to lead the nation and diverting organics and move to a clean energy future. And I'd like to welcome my good friend Marty Suberg, who is the commissioner of the from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the co-sponsor of the event, but also the commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection. Now, New England is leading the country on this issue of wasted food, organics diversion, and clean energy, thanks to the combined efforts of our New England states, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. They're all pushing out on this issue. And I'm sure this group is well aware that food is the largest component of the municipal solid waste stream sent to our landfills. After municipal solid waste recovery through recycling and composting, Americans discarded almost 166 million tons of MSW in 2013. Food is the largest component of that waste stream, constituting about 21%. The good news is that in 2013, we've started to see that food recovery was having an impact at 5%, or 1.4 million tons, up from the 4.8% that was measured in 2012 at 1.74 million tons. But there's a tremendous opportunity going forward to recover wholesome food prior to disposal and to divert true food waste from composting or anaerobic digestion for energy recovery. So in September 2015, USDA and EPA announced the United States' first ever national food waste recovery and reduction goal, calling for a 50% reduction by 2030. As part of this effort, the federal government will convene new partnerships in charitable organizations, faith-based organizations, the private sector, local, state, and tribal governments to reduce food waste in order to improve overall food security and conserve our nation's natural resources. By laying down an ambitious objective, we see huge opportunities for progress that can save families money, feed the hungry, conserve natural resources, and act, most importantly in my mind, on so many things, on climate change. Now, normally my boss and Maddie's boss, Administrator Gina McCarthy, would be here in Boston. She loves Boston more than anywhere else in the world, and she would normally takes advantage of every opportunity, but she had to be somewhere else today. But she likes to say, let's feed people and not landfills. By reducing wasted food in landfills, we cut harmful methane emissions that fuel climate change, conserve our natural resources, and protect our planet for future generations. The USDA EPA announcement presents a major environmental, societal, and public health opportunity for the country, and we are proud to be part of this national effort to reduce food that goes into landfills. Food recovery and issue of wasted food is now in the mainstream conversation of many in this room, and you've been working on it for years and years. So I'd like to thank Chris Beeling from our Regional Assistance Pollution Prevention Program for working with the Harvard Law and Policy Clinic and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for work in setting up this event. Thank you, Chris. Where did Chris go? He's right there. Hi, Chris. And in fact, I must tell you, in my last year or so at EPA, this last year behind me, it's not a year in front of me, unfortunately, but the year behind me, Chris has had me at numerous events. It's become one of my routine activities to follow Chris to these sorts of meetings, which has been kind of fun because it wasn't that way in the beginning when we first came into the office. Our Sustainable Materials Management Program focused specifically on a systemic approach to using and reusing materials more productively over their entire life cycles. Source reduction and diversion of food waste from landfills are key components of sustainable management of food. Successful diversion programs will require robust organics recycling infrastructure, all of which needs to be developed as we go forward. Many of EPA's efforts in organics diversion are designed to support the increase of infrastructure for organics reuse and recycling both regionally and nationally. EPA's Food Recovery Challenge was launched in 2011 as a key component of EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Program, something Maddie will talk much more about. The Food Recovery Challenge works with grocers, restaurants, venues, stadiums, and other organizations to reduce wasted food products through prevention, donation, and recycling. Currently, over 800 businesses participate in the Food Recovery Challenge nationally, with 90 organizations from New England, and I had the pleasure to visit one restaurant in Boston that has gotten the green signal or green notification for their effort to divert food fully. Changing the way people think about food is sometimes a very difficult endeavor. We know people have all sorts of ideas about food in this area. We are part of the foodie revolution in this New England area. I actually live next to Johnson & Wales University, where food is a very big deal, and I've been part of their process down there. But wasting food doesn't have to be part of the foodie revolution. It has to be evaluated across the entire food system. All wholesome food that can be recovered must be. True food waste should be considered a commodity because through composting or anaerobic digestion, what's once was waste can be made into a product that will improve the health of our soils and safely provide nutrients to croplands. We cannot continue to waste the nutrients in food for any reason. So before wrapping up, I'd like to recognize my two other panelists. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts is a national leader for their organic management policies. I remember clearly the day when Marty's predecessors took me aside and said, we're going to do something big in Massachusetts by banning food going to landfills. Their leadership and significant strides in the last few years to amend the rules to remove barriers to the development of certain types of recycling, composting, and other cutting-edge green technologies in the Commonwealth, such as anaerobic digestion, are the forefront of state policies nationwide. This is the hub of so much that's happening. The capstone of their effort is their organics ban, which was launched 2 years ago and will be discussed later in the conference. Marty, I look forward to what you have to say about that and all things that are going on here in Massachusetts. And EPA continues to be proud to work with other states, and we're seeing the similar energy happening in our other 5 states. So finally, Emily, thank you for hosting the conference and for this opportunity to partner with the Harvard Food, Law, and Policy Clinic to bring this event to fruition. I look forward to the event and the outcomes that are going to come out of this. We had a robust initial discussion that the assistant administrator put together, which I was very pleased to attend, and I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to talk to you all today, and I wish you the best of luck as you pull together options and ideas that can guide this effort going forward.
Thank you so much for that. I want to introduce our other welcome speaker, who, as has already been introduced somewhat, Commissioner Martin Suberg, who is Commissioner of Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And as you've heard, Mass DEP has done an amazing job implementing this organics disposal of commercial organic waste ban. And we've been really thrilled to work with them and Recycling Works in Massachusetts, not just on this conference, but on the implementation of that and on making sure that more of that food gets donated, gets used for food, that, you know, educating businesses. So they'll also be hosting a workshop over the rest of this morning. People can join in after the opening plenary, or some people will be joining early, and I'll talk more about that later. So let's welcome Commissioner Suberg.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thanks for your leadership on these issues. Thanks for putting this conference together. We are so pleased to be here. This is such an important conference that is really benefiting from having so many people with so many areas of expertise, so much talent in the room. It's hard not to be enthused to be here and to really recognize the potential of what you may be talking about today. We at DEP have really enjoyed an excellent partnership with the Harvard Law Policy Clinic, and we look forward to continuing this partnership. We've also, as Kurt alluded to, enjoyed a really strong relationship with the US EPA. We're excited by your new initiatives, and we're very much looking forward to finding those opportunities that we all recognize are out there to be found. And I also did want to recognize our other co-sponsor, John and Lorenzo from Recycling Works. Recycling Works is a partner with DEP on so many recycling issues. They really help businesses in the Commonwealth make it easy to do the right thing, really help them figure out how to do the right thing. And so I very much want to acknowledge their participation. Thank you, John. So, welcome to Massachusetts. As Kurt said, there are a lot of great restaurants, a lot of great things to do here. We're struggling a little bit on the baseball front, but hopefully we'll turn that around. I hope you not only get to enjoy this conference, but a little bit of the local hospitality, including some of those great institutions that Kurt mentioned. I'm really excited to talk about this, and being a regulator, sometimes I don't always feel like I get to talk about things that are win-win-wins, but this certainly is one of those events. This topic certainly gives rise to that. The whole idea about thinking about food and organics not as a waste, thinking about food not as a waste, but as a valuable asset, and what we can do with that valuable asset is such exciting opportunities that, and such an exciting topic to focus on. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing how the proceedings go today. We're enthusiastic about our work in the Commonwealth, which I'll touch on in just a moment, and we're very much, and this is a theme I'll return to also in my remarks, the value, the energy that you get from partnerships. As was mentioned by Kurt, we did undertake some regulatory actions that we think have helped this new look at food. We're a state that operates under a solid waste master plan. It was last updated for in 2013, and it goes through 2020. We have a statewide goal of keeping things out of the landfill and increasing recycling, finding the opportunities, creating the regulatory incentives, creating the innovation incentives for reducing things that heretofore we've treated as waste and finding other practical uses for them. In 2014, as Kurt indicated, we initiated the commercial organics ban. 1 ton a week or more can no longer go in the landfills, which, as you've heard, was a substantial part of the amount of waste that went either to landfills or incinerators. So we're almost at the 2-year mark for this ban, and it has gone, I think, and I will defer to John Fisher, but from my perspective, I think it's gone well. I think it's gone smoothly. And I think it's gone smoothly in part because a lot of the work that John Fisher did and a lot of the people in this room did. Before the ban was undertaken, John and my predecessors recognized something very important, which is the value of talking early to stakeholders. The value of talking not only about our goal, but about how to get there, to really get into the logistics, to really get into the how-tos, to make sure that we would have the success that we wanted to have. And it included food establishments, hospitals, universities, haulers, waste disposal companies, those who were interested in pursuing recycling, those who were interested in anaerobic digestion, those who were interested in composting. I think we benefited from a lot of the work that John and that group together did in the 2 years leading up to that ban, and I'd like to think that that was part of the reason that we've had a relatively successful launch. And that is why I think forums like this are so important, because we are going to build on that success by continuing to use that model of collaboration, of working together through the big picture and through the detail types of issues that are so important for making any initiative a success. Since 2014, more than 1,600 Massachusetts and businesses and institutions are diverting leftover food from disposal. Massachusetts organizations, when we last checked, donate more than 25,000 pounds of food annually through food banks and rescue organizations. We've seen innovative organizations like Love & Spoonfuls, spoiler alert, I love these names, Food for Free, and Daily Table all develop in Massachusetts, fostered by the momentum of the disposal ban and the infrastructure growing around it. We've worked with our Massachusetts Department of Public Health, local health officials, businesses, EPA, the Harvard Food Law Policy Clinic to develop best recommended management practices for donating food. As I've said earlier, we value our partnership with Harvard and the Food Law Policy Clinic to provide fact sheets on the legal aspects of food donation, including liability protection, labeling, tax incentives, and a host of other legal issues that are so important. So on behalf of John Fisher, who really was the brains of our organics ban here, and who will be one of your regular participants. Yes, I'm going to embarrass you again, John. You know, I hope many of you get to meet John in the days ahead. We are looking forward to sharing our experiences and hearing about yours and your practical visions for what happens next. We're thrilled that this conference brings together so many national leaders to discuss how we continue to reduce food waste and to learn from each other. There is no shortage of innovation and creative ideas, and I am very much looking forward to hearing and seeing what this conference produces. So once again, I wish you a terrific day, or terrific couple of days, and all the best, and know that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you have an eager partner to help you with this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Suberg. Thanks to both of you again, our co-sponsors. I'm going to make a few very quick points, and then we'll get our kickoff speaker, which I'm very excited about. So first of all, I know some people are standing in the back. There's space up here in the corner. There's a lot of tables open if you want to make your way over there. I want to thank a few other folks that helped out making today a success. One is Tori Oakner, who is an environmental policy analyst and has helped with the steering committee, visioning the conference, and with organization implementation. So thank you to Tori. And I want to thank a few other members of our program staff who have been incredible. They're probably not in the room because they're running around like crazy getting everything together. Najima Holas-Huggins, our communications whiz, Kat Utzler, who most of you communicated with about all of the aspects of registration, Laura Johnston, who is our administrative director and made sure that everything runs on time and is done properly, Emma Klippinger, who is another attorney in our program and is putting in extra hands for everything, and then also our summer interns, who are the volunteers staffing all of the sessions, staffing the registration table. They'll be taking notes, taking pictures. Thank you so much to this team that without them, we wouldn't be having this conference. And I finally want to thank our other funders that supported the conference, which are Atticus Trust and the Harvard University Climate Change Solutions Fund. So let me tell you a few quick logistical things. The first, for those of you who are on social media, please use the hashtag #SaveFoodForPeople with the number 4. We know this way we can create buzz and energy and share with people who aren't here. In another way that we're sharing with people who aren't here, we'll be recording the conference sessions, all of them. So at first, don't cry if you can't go to 2 sessions at once. You can get the video afterwards. And second, if you don't want to be on camera, try to not sit in the front row. And then hopefully those of you who registered this morning got a Reduce and Recover mason jar. Those are for water, coffee, etc. And there are water fountains on both ends of this hallway. There are also restrooms on both ends of this hallway. And then the breakout rooms for today, most of them are on this floor along the hallway, although some of the working groups will be meeting down one floor on the first floor of the building. So that should all be clear in the program. And finally, there are shuttle buses running to and from the Hyatt where many of you are staying. There's a schedule of those at the registration table here. The hotel also has them in case you get home tonight and can't remember what time the bus is tomorrow. But if you have questions, feel free to ask at our registration table. So I think I covered the main logistics. Once again, we're so thrilled to have all of you. I'm excited to kick this off. And without further ado, I want to actually introduce our next speaker. So maybe if Congresswoman Pingree, you want to make your way up. And thank you again to our co-sponsors. Thank you. So we're running a little behind schedule, so I will make this brief. Congresswoman Pingree has been one of my personal heroes, and I've been really fortunate to have the chance to work with her closely and see her in action the past few months. She represents the 1st District of Maine and is a real hero in Congress on food and farm issues, on a broad spectrum of food and farm issues, but also has really been the national leader in Congress on food waste, and has introduced several exciting pieces of legislation that I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about. So I couldn't be more excited to have her kick us off today. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Congresswoman Pingree.
Well, thank you very much, Emily. Thank you to everybody at the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic and all the other co-sponsors of this day. And most importantly, thank you to everybody in this room. It's summer, you may not have heard, but thank you for taking off a day from your work or all the other activities to talk about, or 2 days actually, to talk about what is increasingly an important and very popular topic. So I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. I don't think I've ever been in a room full of so many people educated or wanting to be educated on the topic of food waste, which makes you even more special. Before I get started, I just want to point out I have 3 wonderful people who work on my team who are here today, and maybe you guys just, I know you hate to do this, but just stand up for a minute, because if you have thoughts or questions or suggestions, this is Emily, Kellyanne, and Willie. And they work in our Maine and DC offices. And they'll be here throughout the conference, so we hope we can collect some of your ideas, thoughts, questions along the way. And please pass them along to them or to me. So this, like I said, is probably the most educated room on food waste that I've ever been able to be in. But I usually, when I get a chance to talk about this, I start with a little survey, so just indulge me. Raise your hand if you've ever gotten into an argument with someone in your household or a friend about whether or not you should throw away food because the date on the label has passed. Okay, pretty much. Well, we're going to be discussing that. I'm sure it happens in every household, every college dorm, every restaurant in America. And as we all know, so much food gets thrown away just because the date label has passed, and there are so many other reasons. Food waste is a huge problem in this country. People estimate 30 to 40% of the food that's produced that goes to waste. I feel like you all probably have the numbers memorized, but that's $160 billion a year in uneaten food. It translates to about $125 a month for a family of 4. And we all know it's bad for the environment. It's a waste of the energy of our farmers and the transportation. When that ends up in municipal landfills, which we've already heard a little bit about, it produces methane gas, which is about 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide, which we're already worried about, and it's increasing every day. But as this whole conference is going to address, this is definitely an opportunity for a whole variety of reasons. We know that 50 million Americans are food insecure, and if we stop throwing away healthy, good food and reduce food waste by just 15%, we could cut that number in half. So there is a lot that could be done here. I know this conference will have a chance to address this from all possible aspects, but I want to take my time just to talk a little bit about the wonky side of this and the bill that I've introduced called the Food Recovery Act. It has about 24 proposals that tackle food waste at all levels. And thank you to many of the people in this room who have helped us think about where we can go about doing this. And just a little sense of that, we worked on the Farm Bill when I first arrived in Congress, and we did something very similar. We put together a comprehensive bill that just had everything that we thought was interesting, that we thought was important to the topic, and that we would like to see happen, in a sense, kind of like our big ideas, not as big ideas can get, but big ideas for Congress about what we could possibly do. And we know that there will not be probably an opportunity in Congress to pass an omnibus big bill on food waste, but by putting it all together in one place, then we have the chance to take out a piece at a time and work it into another bill, or put it into legislation on a spending bill, or find other ways to couple it with something that another person is doing in a tax bill or another place. So this is our big picture proposal. We're happy to get you all copies. You can see it on our website. But we're also really interested in your thoughts and suggestions, because many of you are on the front lines of all this. But let me just give you a little bit of an overview. We tried to tackle this at the consumer level in grocery stores and restaurants, schools and other institutions, and certainly on the farm. So again, I'll just give you a few highlights, but also happy to talk more about it. We tried to expand some of the market options for farmers. We have a lot of direction for the USDA. Thank you for being here today, and the EPA. We have a lot of suggestions for all of you, which we hope to make statute. So some of the things are to get the USDA to do more study and research around this. We'd love to see the USDA replace a position that they once had before, which was the USDA Office of Food Recovery, which was there during the Clinton administration. We'd like to collect more data and put together suggestions on reducing food waste and additional ways that the federal government could go about doing that. So that's one way to have the USDA more engaged. Also have the USDA look into some of the research on new technologies to increase shelf life of fresh food, issue a report on their progress around that. We want to do more to help farmers connect with hungry people. We've already been working on changing the eligibility requirements on refrigerated vehicles. They're eligible for farm service loans. I told you this would get a little wonky, but if this is your area, you're going to care deeply about that, and we've already done a little work on that. Under the USDA, we've been looking at ways to encourage more of composting and landfill, which we all know is the last step of this chain, but indulge me here, it's sort of in that department. So some of that is getting USDA to see composting as a conservation practice, which is an important thing under programs like EQIP and the CSP program. So certain programs that people apply for, we need composting listed under that. We want to expand the REAP program, which is around energy incentives to better support on-farm digesters that use wasted food to produce power, which could be useful in the farming community. The retail and restaurant sides, we're still working on some of the issues around the tax provisions on the enhanced deduction for food, and I know we still have some glitches in that, but some of that actually has already been taken out and was passed in a tax omnibus bill that we did last December. So the enhanced deductions, which are both more entities are eligible and the deduction is greater now, so it's just another way to make sure that food that might otherwise be thrown away goes to feed hungry people. And also just some clarifications in the Good Samaritan Donation Act. Sometimes, or often there's a lot of confusion about what happens if you donate food, what happens if a retailer does that, and they're pretty good protections now, but we'd like to do a little more with that. When it comes to schools and institutions, I think we see schools in particular as a wonderful place to do both a lot of education and also to reduce food waste. We'd like to change some of the food procurement rules on just to encourage purchasing of lower price, non-standard size or shape produce. I mean, one of the ideas is, a smaller apple may not be grade A, but it might be perfect for kids in a school. Different kinds of processing, which could be used in school kitchens, could be a way to use up food that wasn't otherwise going to be sold in a retail level. We'd like to provide $5 million a year in mandatory funding. We love mandatory funding with the Food and Agricultural Service Learning Program, because one of our ideas is the more you can teach students about food waste, the more likely they are both to grow up with good habits around this. But I think we all know, watching what happened in the recycling movement, I think like it was 3rd and 4th graders who came home and told their parents that they shouldn't be throwing away a perfectly good bottle in the trash and they should take it to the recycling bin. And as I like to say, students have this way of being, righteously indignant with their parents and can change a lot of habits in their communities and with their parents. So I think that's a really great investment in making sure there's less food waste in school and also educating kids about a lot of the things that we'll all be talking about today. So we have a variety of things around that. We'd like to, as I said, get somebody back at the USDA whose sole position is just to do this. We'd like to require food donations by federal contractors if you have a government contract. And then we put some money into food consumer awareness. Again, this idea that if you remind people, not just through their children, but in a variety of ways about the amount of food that we're wasting and the things that they can do differently. And I think it's particularly important now, as we've seen, we've entered an era where a lot of young people are growing up, and maybe not only does their mother not necessarily cook, but their grandmother might not have cooked. So they don't have a lot of traditions in the home about how to best use leftover, how long you can store food, why it's not a good idea to throw away food, and also just simple things like composting. I'm thrilled at all the communities that are now having either voluntary compost pickup or it will soon be mandatory in places. But a lot of people just don't even know that it's okay to have a little bucket on your counter and put waste food in it. I live on a farm, so I'm lucky. I can do that, and we can take it to the pigs or chicken, or we can take it to the compost pile. But I think in a lot of households, you think, oh, I'm doing something bad if I have a bucket full of trash on my counter. Won't the rats move into my house, or bugs, which I guess fruit flies do every once in a while to all of us. But just this idea of getting people to think about it differently in a way that's lost in our culture. So consumer awareness, we think, is a really important part of it. And then back again to some of the infrastructure issues. For a lot of municipalities, they access federal funding for sewer, water treatment, and landfill, but there hasn't always been dedicated funds, either through the EPA or USDA to help expand the amount of composting operations, or to support anaerobic digesters, or a variety of infrastructure investments that will need to be made. And many communities might start out saying, well, this is a great idea, but we can't afford it, even though, as we all know, in the long run, it will be a great cost savings in landfills if we're not depositing so much organic matter, and also is, of course, much better for the environment. So as I said, we look at this bill comprehensively. We're trying to take, each part, look at different departments that could have more funding or more incentives, grants written in a different way, whatever we can do at a federal level to encourage this. And you're already hearing about the things that can be done at a state and municipal level. And so when we have a connection with funding to states and municipalities, we want to enhance that. I mentioned that there's a couple of pieces we've already separated out. We've already been working on refrigerated trucks, which is more of an agency issue. We've already gotten some of the tax provisions changed. But one of the pieces we've just recently removed, removed from our bill and done as a standalone bill, is around date labeling. So that's one of the things we talked about in the beginning. And I know the Finks are here in this room, and through ReFed, they've just done some really wonderful research, which is a rarity for most of us in Congress to have, that much documentation, and particularly cost-benefit analysis to show our colleagues. And date labeling is considered one of the things that, if we could change that, it would be one of the most cost-effective ways to reduce waste. So, as I said to all of you, almost every household has this argument when you pick up crackers or something in a jar and you say, well, look at the date on this, and one person says, well, we've got to throw that away, and the other person says, no, that's perfectly good food, we've got to eat it. Well, there's a tremendous amount of confusion around date labels, and as many of you know, most labels have no scientific explanation. They're a decision by the manufacturer. They've been doing great work here at Harvard around that, and a lot of the rest of you have been studying it, and we've decided we should just move forward on a federal law that does this. And our idea is just to have, basically two categories. Because there are so many already, some of them say best by, used by, and expires on, we want to just go ahead and simplify this. So most food that you buy every day would have a label that just says best if used by. That way you'd pick it up and you'd be able to say, okay, this means that it will be best if I eat it by a certain date, but it won't make me sick. It might taste stale, but it might actually be good 2 years later. A can of soup, a bag of crackers, let's face it. And the other one will say expires on. And that would be the kind of food that the FDA or the USDA determined really is dangerous if you eat it after a certain date. And it would give consumers a sense, okay, that one I should throw away. But as we know, that could greatly reduce the amount of food. And it would also greatly reduce the amount of food that got thrown away, but it would also eliminate a lot of confusion about food donations. I don't have to get into the myriad of complications that go on in grocery stores today, but food often gets donated or taken out of the store long before the expiration date, which isn't even really an expiration date, just the date. And so that's great for food banks when they're able to get it. But a lot of times it creates confusion even with the people going into the food bank who say, wait, is this okay? Can I eat it? Are they just giving me food that's going to make me sick? And that's something we need to know. Plus, about 20 states in this country have laws that say if the date is passed, you have to throw it away. You're not allowed to give it away or sell it. And that's kind of crazy because those are just arbitrary dates. So you've got 20 states. So we've got a lot of confusion and lack of uniformity. So along with Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, we introduced this bill. One of the great things about doing it was almost immediately we had a broad base of support from many of you in the room, environmental groups, groups that are concerned about feeding the hungry, and the food insecure. The industry, Nestle's and Campbell's, stood by us because, contrary to popular belief, many of those manufacturers aren't hoping that their food will end up in stores and get thrown away. They actually would like to have a more sensible system to deal with this too. So we're thrilled about moving forward on that, and think that this is yet another way where you can take kind of a simple piece of this, which will be, of course, not easy to change, but not particularly controversial, and the solution seems more or less obvious to all of us. So let me just wrap this up and then take a couple of questions if we have time. But I think, even though I'm working on the legislative side, one of the wonderful things about this issue is that in a very short period of time, we've seen a tremendous growth in the interest around food waste. Even though I know there are people in this room who have been dealing with collecting data and encouraging us to do different things around this topic for 10 or 15 years, all of a sudden it seems like there's an enormous amount of focus on this, and that's wonderful. Because part of what I think happens when you're working on public policy and legislation is you try to get the information out there, you try to get it debated in your state legislature and Congress or your city council, but then that causes a kind of awareness that people didn't have before. And part of what we need to change here is around our culture. And we've seen that. People are already talking about it. Cities and states are already adapting different things. I know many of you are in the room here because there are business opportunities, which is great. People are creating this as a way of creating a different kind of business or a new opportunity for an existing business. Municipalities and states are moving forward, and I think the more of them that do, the more opportunities there will be in other places for a state to say, oh, they've already done this in such and such states, and they've worked out a lot of the details, or they've put together many of the coalitions that you need. And politically, this is one of those issues that so far seems to be relatively non-controversial. And I'll just wrap it up by saying I started being an organic farmer in the 1970s. I was a state legislator in the 1990s. And I can't tell you how many unpopular topics I have worked on or fought for on the area of food labeling or, thank you, encouraging organic farming, toxics in our food. I mean, I have been a longtime supporter of a lot of tough issues, and I'm an organic farmer myself, and I'm thrilled to do it. And I have been thrilled to see the changes in our culture and the fact that the marketplace has really started to push policymakers that I serve with to understand that this is what the public and the consumer wants. But the good news on food waste is it has to be one of the first times I've ever gotten to work on a topic where there is really a broad base of support. In fact, a couple of years ago, the first time I went to hear somebody talk about this, my initial reaction was, oh, food waste. Oh, that's kind of a nice thing to talk about. But, I gotta stick with the tough issues, and I've got a lot of other things to deal with. And the more I have learned along the way, the more I have realized what a serious environmental issue this is, what incredible disrespect, in a sense, it is to our farming community to waste as much food as we do, but also an environmental issue to not only transport this food around the country, but then waste it when it gets there. It's a serious issue on making sure, on not getting food to the people who are actually hungry, with a growing number of people who are hungry in our community. And so from so many different angles, I've come to realize that this represents the concern of a lot of us. And as I said, it is an issue where waste itself seems to have no constituency in support of it. So my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have been willing to move forward on this. We've gotten great cooperation, as you heard. The EPA and the USDA and the administration have been very supportive about moving forward on this. The Republican chair of the Ag Committee just recently held a hearing, which, again, you might have heard that this is a Congress that isn't really that active on activities. So even getting a hearing on a topic was wonderful, and it was a great panel, some of the people in this room that represented all sides of it. And as I said, industry has been incredibly supportive and creative, from the retailers to the manufacturers to the trade associations that represent them. So for once, I won't say the solutions are easy. In fact, I think they're monumental, and I think it's going to take us a long time to change this. But I think with working on all the fronts that we're talking about in this bill and that all of you are talking about it. And lastly, I just like to say I've never worked on an issue like this before where everyone's grandmother has said, don't waste your food. So in our hearts, we know it's the wrong thing to do. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for having me here today and for the work you're doing. Do you want to do a question? I know you guys need to catch up a little bit. I'm happy to take a couple questions and get my staff to answer the tough ones.
Hi, thank you for being here. That's really exciting. I'm like super enthusiastic about your bill and everything that you said. And I was wondering, in terms of your charge to the audience here, how best can we all collectively use our voices with our elected officials at every level to support this and initiatives like this at every level of government?
Great. Well, thank you for that offer. In terms of this bill, we're still actively seeking co-sponsors. So, wherever you're from, check to see if your member of Congress has signed on to this bill yet. And hopefully as provisions come to the floor, we can let you know when we're taking a vote on an individual part of the bill. But just to get a broad base of support about this, so anyone that you know who might want to sign on as a co-sponsor, or if you know a member of Congress in another state, or your cousin lives over there, let them know about it too. So that's very helpful. And I also think, yes?
Oh, the number of the bill?
4184. I knew that, yeah. Yeah, so that would be very helpful at this point. And I think the second thing is because each of you are in this room because you are motivated by some particular interest around this topic, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to feed more hungry people or you're an educator, to let your member of Congress know, even if they're already a supporter, the specific thing that you're doing that would be enhanced by something in this bill. Because I think that also helps any of us who serve in Congress or a state legislature and we're confronted with lots of different issues that we have to deal with, and sometimes we're not all experts on everything. So I think they would find it very valuable to know that they have a constituent that's working on this in one way or another. So that would be very helpful as well. And the same thing, the more we can do to have states like Massachusetts that are moving forward on this, your city council, your town government, whatever it is, I think the more that we do this at all levels, the more likely Congress will be able to move forward on it, and we'll get some federal policy around it. And also, in many ways, what we're looking for is more federal funding around this that could help your state or municipality.
Thanks very much. Like probably many in this room, I've been amazed by the rapidity with which so many different stakeholders have taken on this issue in the last 18, 24 months. What would you say was the principal trigger or triggers? I mean, the US has been wasting food for decades on this scale. Why is it happening now?
Well, I think, Tristram, really because of the work that you've been doing. I know you're speaking today. Tristram is also visiting us from the UK, and please give him a little hug because of the challenges going on over there. But I think we all need to give some sympathy. But Tristram is also, he's an author, but also does these wonderful activities called Feeding the 5,000, where they come into a community and show how you can use food that would otherwise get wasted. But really just those kinds of public awareness opportunities, I think, have really changed a lot of this debate and dialogue. Dan Barber shutting down his restaurant for a week and only doing food, wasted food and otherwise not used. I mean, you may not, most of us weren't in New York City that week. Most of us didn't go to his restaurant. But you read the stories, and you hear from someone else about it, and you start to say, you could have a whole restaurant run off of food that would otherwise be thrown away, or you could feed 5,000 people who otherwise didn't have a meal that day with food that would otherwise be thrown away. And honestly, I think those kinds of things, get it in the media, get it in the news. Because, normally you say to somebody, I'd like to talk to you about food waste and this wonderful piece of legislation I'm working on, and they turn the other way and kind of like, go to their office and take a nap. It just doesn't sound like something compelling, but you get the statistics out in front of people and help them understand the costs and the environmental challenges that we're dealing with. And just, again, the very idea, we don't waste things. We don't want to waste things, and we don't want to be seen as doing that. Anybody else? Well, I'm going to let it go there. I'll be around this morning. As I said, my staff is here, and we'd love to hear more of your thoughts and questions and ideas. And again, thank you to Emily and Harvard for bringing us all together, and thank you to everybody in this room for the work you're doing. I think we will see a lot of progress in the near future, and I think we should feel very good about working on this cause together. So thank you very much.
I'm really excited to have this opening panel, which is we're trying to set the stage for discussions that I think we'll have throughout the conference. So in this growing national dialogue about food waste, we see a merger of two communities that have been working on this issue for quite some time. And I think we are, as we were planning the conference and talking with our steering committee and partners, we really realized that, we sort of bring up the environmental issues and the hunger issues that both are impacted when we waste food, but we haven't really had a discussion about how they meet with each other, where there might be tensions. So the purpose of this panel is to really bring out those two threads of hunger relief and sort of food rescue for those in need, and then the environmental side, and kind of talk about places where there's synergies and where there might be tensions as well, and start a discussion that will hopefully carry through the next few days on how we kind of bring together these two communities, welcome them both here, and figure out the places where we can work together going forward. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. They'll each speak briefly, and then I have a few questions for them. And then we have 3x5 cards on all the tables. So we'll ask you to actually write questions down on those, and we'll start collecting them partway through and actually read your questions. If that is, if we have time, we might take a few audience questions too, but we're hoping that's a good way to figure out the common questions and get those answered. So I'm going to actually, I think, introduce all three right now, and then we'll just take turns speaking. We're going to start with Karen Hanner, who's to my right, and who's the Managing Director of Manufacturing Product Sourcing at Feeding America. She collaborates with various food manufacturers and retailers to obtain unsold food that can be used to feed those that are in need. And she's been a real national leader representing Feeding America, working with us and others on this issue. Next to her is Maddie Stanislaus, who we heard about earlier, who's the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Land and Emergency Management at EPA. Is that the new name?
Yes, it is.
The new name. He's leading efforts at sustainable materials management and food waste and food recovery, including, as you heard, helping to support this conference, the 2015 Food Recovery Summit, and also the call to action, which I'm sure we'll hear about. And then finally, we'll hear from Doug Rao, who is the founder and president of Daily Table, which is a nonprofit food retail store in Dorchester here in Boston. And Doug was actually the first client for our clinic and introduced us to this issue of food waste. So thank you to Doug for the sleepless nights. I've been hard at work on this issue. Doug was previously the president of Trader Joe's, so he has a long history in food retail, and he'll be telling about his story and how he started Daily Table. So without further ado, I'll turn it to Hannah to lead us off.
Thank you, Emily. And first of all, thank you for hosting this amazing conference. It's really great to be at a conversation really focused on the top of the hierarchy. The intersection of food insecurity and wasted food is obviously the center of the work that we do, and it's really amazing to have this entire group here to be able to focus on just that piece of the entire food recovery hierarchy. I'm also very honored to represent Feeding America to kick this off. I was asked to kind of set the stage in terms of get the room to where food banking and food rescue has been, which is a huge challenge to do in a few moments. But I just want to hit some highlights, because I recognize most of the people in this room are pretty familiar with food rescue, but I really want to maybe let you walk away with a couple of new thoughts as we continue the conversation about challenges and opportunities going forward. First of all, Feeding America and our network of food banks has really been in this intersection for over 40 years. You may or may not know that the first food bank was created in Phoenix, where John Van Hengel happened to notice that there was food being wasted going out the back door of a grocery store and was in a dumpster, and right down the street there was St. Mary's Pantry. So John said, this makes no sense. These nutrients should be going to these people that are food insecure, connected the two organizations, and food banking was born. We've evolved a lot over the last almost 40 years, and it's really been through a process of the food banks really looking at what's going on in their communities, working to be able to access more food, to be able to ultimately feed more people. Today, our network of food banks rescues over 2.8 billion pounds of food, which is about 60% of the 4.2 billion pounds that we distribute through 200 food banks and 60,000 agencies, working in partnership with the industry, from farm all the way through the consumer-facing businesses at retail and food service. In total, our network of food banks serves 46 million Americans. And I want to stop here because while this entire conversation is going to be really positive going forward, focusing on rescuing food, I just want to put a face on that food insecure American and just let you remember that it's our neighbor that struggles with putting enough food on the table. It's a single dad that maybe lost his job, or a family who had an unexpected medical illness and that just depleted their savings. Who knows what the economy is going to do after last week from the global perspective. But really, if you look at a senior that's depended on the savings that they've accumulated through their life, just to see it plummet when the economy goes bad, it really is the everyday. It's our neighbor. It's 48 million Americans, 1 in 7. It's the people that teach our children, the people that drive our buses. It really is our community that we need to make sure we're focused on getting this food that would otherwise go to waste. I don't need to give you statistics on how much food is out there that could be rescuable and could be edible. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the exciting things that are going on to help capture that food and have gone on and should go on and will continue to grow as this movement actually moves forward. When you think about the Feeding America system, it's easy to stand up and say, this is a large organization that does a lot across the country. But reality is, it's the combination of 200 individual, passionate organizations that are really committed to their communities. You're going to hear from 3 or 4 of our members that are here. City Harvest in New York, who's doing some great work in terms of being able, you're going to hear all the things that they do, but be able to rescue really food that's really at the end of its shelf life, working with restaurants and grocery stores. You're going to hear from Regional Food Bank of Boston, who's here, who's working in partnership with Doug. You'll hear about some of the work they're doing here that's really creative and innovative. You're going to hear from Phil Abundance, who also has some really amazing things that are happening in their community. And that's just a representation of what's going on. Because really food banking has been food rescue defined as innovation. I spent a lot of years in the consumer packaged goods industry, working at Kraft and Keebler, and really living the food industry. But I've never worked with a larger group of passionate, dedicated, creative, innovative individuals that really look to say, look, food is going to waste. We've got to capture it to feed the people that we serve. If you look over the history of food banking and look at the creative history that we've got, a perfect example of how an opportunity was identified and then piloted and then proven and then expanded is our retail rescue program. We've worked with food banks on a local basis, have worked with individual retailers to figure out how do you get this food that's at the end of its shelf life, be able to capture it, pick it up, and then distribute it quickly to the clients in need. That takes creativity. Really, as we stand here today, the history that where we've come from, we've been able to capture the easy food, right? The manufacturing sector is working with food banks and with agencies across the country very effectively. It's packaged, it's labeled, maybe the date labeling isn't right. We can talk about that issue too. But it's easy to pick up and distribute. Where the opportunities are now, which is why this conversation is so great to have today, is because now we're trying to, as a community, rescue food that's a lot more challenging. We're looking at the ag sector, where at farms and in the processing piece, billions of pounds of food are being either left unharvested or tilled under because there's no market for it. And on the other end, we're looking at grocery stores and food service operations where, again, the food is perishable, it's at the end of its shelf life, and it's harder to pick up. So this is the place where innovation has to be important. It has to be partners coming together, and it really is how we're going to make a difference going forward. I mentioned a little bit about the Feeding America Network and the importance of the structure, because it really is an opportunity for individual food banks based on an individual community to be able to identify an opportunity, prove something out, and then expand it through the power of the Feeding America Network to bring it to scale. We have the opportunity to work with local retailers or regional retailers like BJ's and prove out a project and then roll it out. Within the ag segment, we've got a couple of pilots. I just want to give you examples of a couple of segments that are out there that we've been working on that really have the opportunity to scale, but it's going to take partnerships and investment and really innovative thinking to make it happen. We've rescued maybe a million pounds of sweet corn from Minnesota that would have been tilled under. Infrastructure's challenging there, but the reality is there's 40 to 50 million pounds each year that go to waste. So how do we come together to figure this out, to capture more of that food, to feed hungry people so that it doesn't go to waste? One of the most exciting pilots that we have in place is in Tennessee, where there's a green bean producer that produces for the fresh market. And product that was coming in from the field was sorted into grade A, sellable, and field waste. Well, in working with the food bank there, they were able to put in a new line for $35,000, pretty small investment, so that now the product is sorted as grade A, sellable, grade B, donatable, and field waste. That, in its first year, provided about 40,000 pounds of green beans to be distributed to the community. It was a pilot. We figured it out because it had to be cool. The field temp had to be taken out of the product and it had to be packaged. Year 2, they're anticipating 1 million pounds of green beans will be rescued this way. And year 3 going forward, there's 3 million pounds of beans right now that are going out the back door, back with the field waste to be back tilled under. So these are the kind of pilots that we see are something that are really going to make a difference going forward, but it's going to take partnerships, investment, and really collaboration to make these happen. The only other piece that I wanted to mention is that there's a cost to this. And this is where I think where we're really pleased to see the variation and the breadth of stakeholders in these conversations nowadays, because it takes infrastructure, it takes processing, but it also takes creative thinking. There are ways to be able to compensate the wasted food generator. I never say food waste. I say wasted food because obviously for the conversation that we're having, there's nutrient value in that food. But be able to recognize that there's a cost to be able to take that out of the current, the current waste stream and convert it into something that can be distributable and also consumed by the clients that we all serve. An example that's really creative coming out of Del Monte is that as you process peaches each season, there's a spec for what the color is, how large the piece is, and all of that. All of the out-of-spec product was going to waste. Well, there's obviously a cost to put that in the can. So working with our food bank system and Del Monte, we've come up with a way that that product can be canned, and then the food banks can then purchase, and I use that word very cautiously, they provide a cash compensation back to Del Monte to cover the cost of that canning that product, and then based on the new tax incentives that were incorporated in the PATH Act that was implemented at the end of the fiscal, or the end of the calendar year. Thank you to Congress. I don't know where Shelley went, but they are still able to, that product counts as a partial donation, partial sale, so that they are still eligible for tax benefits. So that's a creative pilot that we know we have the opportunity to scale. Okay, I could go on, but I think what I want to do is just set the tone that food rescue through our system and with many other individual organizations that are out there to be able to solve this dual need of rescuing food and feeding the food insecure is just going to take lots of collaboration, innovative thinking, but most of all, passionate, committed individuals, and this room is just an example of those that are here to do it, and we really want to continue the conversation with Maddie, who's going to speak from the government perspective from EPA. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for for inviting me, but also thank you. Thank you for the work that you do and the inspiration and the innovation that I see every day in this work, which I will get into it a bit later. But I'll be remiss. My social media people will really criticize me if I don't do this. Follow us on EPA Land. Follow us on hashtag No Wasted Food. So by the end of the day, you're all going to follow us, right? So why is EPA even in this space? Obviously, we care about the hungry, but there's a strong environmental nexus. Landfills are the most significant contributor of methane. The congressman talked about it. Food, decomposing food, is the largest organic component, is the largest contributor of methane there. But it's not only that. Substantially, the usable land base, about 80% is used for farming in this country. Water, more and more, is more of a restricted commodity, and water is by far the primary use is for growing food, and the tremendous energy investment in producing food. We also have really pushed a life cycle-based approach to everything that we do. How do we really capture the most productive outcome based on look at the full life cycle of products or materials for society and economically. And obviously the last thing is the economics. Various metrics, the business sector loses about $160 billion a year in wasted food. Families lose $1,600 or so every year in throwing away wasted food. So this led EPA and USDA to announce about a year and a half ago a goal of reducing food loss by 50% by 2030. So it's received fairly well. We love saying goal setting, but then how are we going to actually achieve that? So we pulled together what we hope to be the real leaders, many of the leaders in this food work in the first ever, we believe, Food Summit about a year ago or so, and try to figure out, well, how do we best capture those best practices and really identify concrete actions and try to scale it up. So we posted the call to action on both US EPA and USDA's website yesterday. So take a look at that, So I'll go through a little bit, but I ask you to take a look at it and how can you help drive that? Because and let me just start with, it cannot be EPA, it cannot be the government alone. We own a piece of it, but wasted food is a failure of the system. It's a societal breakdown of valuable products being thrown away. So when you have a societal breakdown, it really requires all of us to collaborate and us to drive. But really drive in a disruptive way. We need to take on some of the long-held beliefs. Really challenge us, challenge government, what we could do better. How can we challenge each other? And I really like the focus on the upper part of the hierarchy, which people tend to lose sight of. Why do we focus on the upper part of the hierarchy? That is the most valuable part of the hierarchy because you are saving food for food purposes. Once we exhaust all those opportunities of saving food at its source, then clearly there's some other opportunities, but we cannot have, for example, investment in composting at the cost of saving food. I'm going to be provocative a little bit, right? So we need to have a real aligned strategy at the state, federal, and local government, and in the private sector. So quickly, again, let me just, before I get into that, so I've always been inspired by this work because it's really the inspiration, the passion that people bring to this is really really amazing to me. Everything from the business leaders who really drive this, and sometimes it's really tough within the corporate sector. How do you build that business case? How do you take some risk? I really appreciate that leadership. Academia, obviously, hosting us and leading this, various kind of public sector groups. I know NRDC, Dana is somewhere in the room, and who's been a real leader of this, Feeding America, state and local governments. So I really kind of appreciate that, but that's the kind of leadership that we're going to need. So really quickly, the challenge identifies a number of things. Data is a really big issue, tracking, collecting data in the public and private sector, increase in public awareness, but in a really important way that really drives actions. In the ReFed report, it really talks about the tremendous importance of investing in education. We really kind of need to grapple with what that means, what I call, how do we monetize the value of education, the value of data in a way that resonates. And many people, we've done this tracking, so investment in education at the local government has a 3-year cycle. because people don't view that as value added. So how do we create a monetization of the value of education? Because frankly, and I fought local budgets for a long time, investment in recycling, investment in education is not viewed as an economically value-added proposition. So something that we collectively need to do a little bit of work on. Obviously, prevention strategy, the whole emphasis of this event for all is value. Expanding our partnerships and innovative partnerships. And at the Food Summit, I was really struck by a composter who said, look, this is a collective goal that we have. If my particular composting business changes to achieve a greater good, I'll figure out a way to make money. So how do we kind of figure out, from a systematic way and looking at new partnerships? We talked about date labeling and food safety. Clearly, it's important. There's a movement internationally. Italy is going away from that. And there's a lot of movement in various European countries of refining or going away from date labels in total. So I know there's some movement on that. But we can do some education on that, some education on the liability issues, and building the right infrastructure in the right place, as opposed to the wrong infrastructure that drives the worst behavior. How do we kind of get that information out, particularly to, I don't want to call out local, but there are some decisions about infrastructure that really can impede opportunities. The call to action really calls out some really best practice in the production arena. Some great examples are optimizing the distribution networks to reduce transportation and storage costs, manufacturing, working within companies and other manufacturers to ensure the labeling is clear and the value-added proposition. I mentioned earlier this morning, OECD has done an analysis of the policies of the G7 countries. And one of the interesting conclusions is that from a supply chain, there is a real, particularly in the food industry, there's a real lack of belief that an investment in my part of the supply chain will result in me being rewarded. So that while there's an investment that will result in a reward, there's not a common understanding, just my investment in my part of the supply chain will result in reward to me. So how do we kind of build kind of the business case so that there's a collective benefit, also an individualized benefit for the decision maker? Clearly, the right recovery and recycling side, and there's a lot of examples there, and the right kind of policy and regulation. So I will close with this. You are all leaders, and again, I'm always inspired by that, but if this is the only choir that leads, we fail. We will never meet the 2030 goal. So the one challenge I'd like to put to you all is challenge me, challenge the government, challenge each other. How do we really make this resonate? How do we really tip this in society? I think I'm tremendously impressed with some of the innovation that's happened on the business side, some really interesting business incubation, some real analysis, academia, some best practices in businesses. But if that's all we do, we fail, right? We have made significant inroads, but this is a societal, systematic breakdown that came out from a multiple of factors. How do we lead within our world, and how do we be disruptive in reaching out to other segments of the system? So with that, I will close, and looking forward to you challenging me. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So first of all, thanks to Emily and the staff and EPA for putting this together. In the short period of time I've been involved in this, this room is about 5 times the size of the first gathering I think we had. And so it's a wonderful indication of what's happening. I will say in all honesty that it's quite humbling to be asked to represent a point of view about this in a room of so many people who have been at this so much longer and are at such scale and doing such amazing things. So what I'm going to do is tell a story a little bit about my learnings and perhaps highlight both some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that some of you are aware of, but perhaps some of you aren't. As Emily mentioned, I spent 35 years in the food business, and a lot of that was with Trader Joe's, 31 years. I was president for a long time. 20 years ago this month, I had the opportunity to do something unusual for a company. We decided to grow by leapfrogging 3,000 miles from California to New England to open the first stores here and then recreate the company basically here in the East. At the time I did that, I had this audacious goal of why don't we see if we can't give away all the food we're wasting and just give it away. And so we opened our first 2 stores here in Boston, one in Cambridge, one in Brookline, and it was virtually impossible. There wasn't 11 spoonfuls. There was, the food bank didn't have the capability at that time, nor do I think they are designed for, sending their truck around to our stores for the small amounts of incremental product 7 days a week. We struggled to get food recovered. Today, it's very different, I'm happy to say. But that was one of the big learnings. So when I graduated from Trader Joe's 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to do a fellowship here at Harvard. And it was during that fellowship that I heard about this thing called the Food Law and Policy Clinic and met Emily and started talking to her about, can you look and see, I have this idea. Can you help me figure out, 1, is it legal? 2, what are the possibilities here in policy that we should be looking at? And Emily and her staff have been nothing but phenomenally supportive, as I think probably many of you in this room know. But it's been a 6.5-year dance of learning and going down this road together. So the first thought for me was when I was getting mailings from Feeding America at my home saying that 1 in 6 Americans are hungry. So I'm happy to hear maybe it's only 1 in 7 now, huge improvement. But 1 in 6 Americans were hungry. And that languaging is accurate if you redefine hunger. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought, oh my God, 1 in 6 Americans are like starving. They don't have enough to eat. They can't get the calories they need. It's like, well, so I had this idea because I've been in the food industry forever, and Trader Joe's kind of iconic, does things a little differently. Basically, if you don't produce the product or make it, you aren't selling to Trader Joe's because they don't deal with middlemen, wholesalers, et cetera. So I spent much of my time there traveling the world and dealing with farmers, dealing with manufacturers, et cetera, and got to see throughout the entire system how much food was being wasted. So I had thought, okay, well, look, this must be a simple logistics issue. We got all this food, so we just got to get it to the food banks. They'll distribute it, and hunger will be solved. And I was the first one to ever think of that, of course. And so I met with Catherine D'Amato, who for 25 years has been the wonderful CEO and president of Greater Boston Food Bank, which is just a fantastic food bank we have here in Boston. And I brought her this great idea. I was going to go around and collect the bread, whole grain, of course, from all the grocers in this area, bring it down to the food banks, and they would distribute bread because those 1 in 6 hungry, they need something to eat. And she looked at me and said, well, I guess we could use some bread, perhaps. And it was like, wait a minute, aren't people hungry? So, well, we really need fruits and vegetables and perishable and protein, and some, dairy. And so my first learning here was hunger isn't what I thought it was for many of these 1 in 6. That's not to deny that there are people in America, and we all know this, that truly don't have enough to eat. But when we're talking about 48 million Americans, we're talking about the fact that obesity is the face of that hunger. And so it's what there is when you have a shortage of nutrients, but too many of the wrong calories. So first learning for me was, all right, if hunger isn't what I thought it was, then solving it isn't so much about a full stomach, it's about a healthy meal. And a healthy meal turns out to be a lot more difficult to deliver than just calories. That's where I also went, okay, well, we've got about 1/3 to 40% of what we grow that's not being consumed, that's still available. And this is, 2009, 2010. A lot of the recovery networks weren't as developed as they are today. And I thought, well, okay, we'll get involved, we'll recover this food. And then how do we get this affordable nutrition? So I started talking, doing some focus groups, and discovered that, well, one of the challenges, and this actually came through a conversation with Vicky Esquerra, who was the CEO and president of Feeding America at the time. And then while I was here doing this fellowship, I had 2-hour-long conversations with her and a couple other people on the team. And it was through Vicky's insights of sharing that one of the challenges that's faced is that a number of people won't use the services because of dignity issues, because they're ashamed or embarrassed, and particularly the working poor. And that actually had not dawned on me. I wasn't aware of that. And it was through her through the conversations with Vicki that I thought, well, good heavens, if a percentage of people, particularly working poor, are not able to or not willing to, then the big aha for me was many people are even hungrier to keep their dignity than they are their health. And if we're going to meet them to deliver a sustainable, healthy solution, we got to do it in a way that doesn't make them feel lessened in any way. Not to say that there's not fantastic work that all of us in this room are doing in food recovery, food banks, donations, just simply say that it was turned out that we're not reaching everybody that way. And I know in long conversations, again, with Catherine D'Amato, et cetera, that there's a gap. And a gap, particularly with the working poor, that are out buying food, but they're not buying the food that they should be eating. They're buying the food they could afford. So the idea was, what can we do then to bring them affordable nutrition that would be economically agnostic to the fast food and the cheap calorie options? So I, of course, have spent my life as a retailer. So as you know, if you're a hammer, the whole world's a nail. So the solution had to be retail. So for me, a little tongue-in-cheek on that was that what retail does, and the one thing it has, is an opportunity to transfer the power differential. So certainly in a free marketplace, we have voluntary exchange. You can shop where you want to shop. A retailer's got to earn your patronage every day. You choose to go in there. You then choose what you want. You then choose to come back if you wish. So our job would then be to earn the patronage by delivering fresh, tasty, delicious, and truly affordable, defined by the user, not by me, defined by those in need, of what is the economic affordability to be able to come back to a store that is there when you need it. So unlike, say, farmers markets, which I love, try to shop in the one in Newton where I live, the farmers markets aren't there many times when someone gets off the bus. They're working several jobs, they're hungry. So the other big learning I had was it turns out that if you want to meet people where their needs really are, then most Americans don't have any time, and as you move down the economic rung, you have less time. Particularly, again, working poor, often are working several jobs, they're taking public transportation, and they're really short on time. So their comments to me were, if you really want to help us, don't just give me a store with product, don't just hand me product, give me a meal. Grab and go, because when I walk through the door at 6:30 at night, I have dinner in my hand or there's trouble. So we then changed our model, created a large kitchen. We recover about 50% of what we sell, and we sell this, as I said, pennies on the dollar. Now, Daily Table's a different model. Right away, your ears will perk up like, they're selling this? They go out and donate, collect food, and they turn around and sell it. Well, we're doing it for the issue I said before of dignity. We're doing it also to help try and recover some of the expensive costs that brick and mortar and retail has. We're also doing it because it's economically more sustainable for us. And we are a 501c3. It took quite a dance to get through IRS, but at the end, they recognize that we are indeed a hunger relief healthcare agency masquerading as a retail store. And so we now have, the compromise we made with them was we're a membership store. So we have about 14,000 people that have signed up to be members. It's free. You just have to give us your zip so we can track you and a phone number. We don't ask your name or address or any of that stuff specifically, but we do track. We know that about 90% of our customers come from the immediate contiguous zips to us that are Section 330 eligible, that are economically challenged. And hence, 90% of our customers meet that criteria of, quote, a charitable need, which IRS requires for us as a 501c3. But because of that, we're able to track a whole bunch of stuff. We're able to track the fact that our average customer down in this economically challenged area, since we opened over a year ago, that our basket size has gone up, not quite double, but it's gone up about 70%. And what that means is, particularly in this group that don't have money to waste on food, they've come in, they buy the healthy, about 50% of what we sell are meals made in the kitchen, entrees, soups, salads, sandwiches, smoothies, these sorts of things. That about 50% of our sales are things we produce. And everything we make I think that we're one of the few retailers in the world, for that matter. Everything that we carry meets the tough guidelines of a nutrition task force we put together of Harvard School of Public Health, Boston Medical Center, Children's Hospital, Tufts, Codman's, Boston Public Health Commission, et cetera. We've got 10 or 12 nutritionists all together. I thought it'd be a cat and dog fight. It wasn't. Turns out they almost all instantly, universally agreed, sugar, public enemy number one. Salt, yeah, gotta watch that, keep it down. Fat, if you ban trans fats out of your store, we don't really care so much. You actually need fat, turns out. We need more of it than we thought. And fiber is important, of course, because it helps regulate the carbohydrate digestion. So we have met or exceeded those nutritional guidelines. One of our other big learnings was, and we learned this through the community, don't talk to us about nutrition. Don't talk to us about health. Turns us off. Doesn't sound good. Sounds like, what did I give up for that? You know, it's like, oh, you made it healthy. You know, oh no. So we actually backdoor that. And what we do is we talk about fresh, you know, we talk about delicious, you know, it better taste good or you're not coming back. We talk about convenient. We talk about incredibly affordable. And then we a little bit kind of backdoor by saying, this is food that you're going to feel your best and be your best. You and your kids are going to feel and be your best. So these are the learnings that for me as a retailer, but also someone who's involved with, we've recovered now about 700,000 pounds of food, just our one little store. We work with and have worked with Network. I actually believe and now live the philosophy that you deal with a systemic problem, like wasted food, like 1 in 6 Americans are food insecure. And there's not going to be any single organization, no matter how large they are, no matter what channel they're in, that can solve it by themselves. That it truly is a network of aligned partners working together, whether it be government, other nonprofits, private enterprise, all together. It's an all hands on deck because it's way too big for any of us. And so the other thing is I would like to see out of this gathering that we have, I had the opportunity to study with Peter Drucker when I was at Trader Joe's. And I woke up one day and realized I'm a grocer. Oh my God, how'd that happen? And I said, well, I better go get some education. So I went and got my executive MBA at Drucker School of Management. And he was a Trader Joe's shopper, it turns out. But it was through him I learned that when he would go into consulting, at the end of it, they'd, you know, whether it's General Motors or, you know, Girl Scouts of America, for-profit, nonprofit, he didn't really see much difference. They'd say, oh, Peter, this was so amazing. We learned so much. He said, don't tell me that. Tell me how Monday is going to be different. I think we should challenge each one of us, myself, how will tomorrow or Thursday or next Monday be different because we were here today? Thank you.
Thank you to the three of you who are really working in the trenches on these tough issues. I'm going to remind people we have 3x5 cards on tables, and actually we have some of our staff and interns floating around who will start collecting those now. So feel free, sorry, you'll have your hand up for a little bit, keep them up and we'll get around to those. I want to start off the conversation actually with sort of, you know, a question that all of you have touched on, but sort of hitting home kind of what the title of the panel is. So I think really, how can the two communities that are represented on this stage, that are represented in this room, those really looking at hunger relief and at food rescue from that perspective, and those really looking at food waste from an environmental perspective, what can we sort of learn from each other, support each other, but also the hard question, where are there tensions? You know, Karen alluded to one at the beginning, which is what we call this food, which I think makes an impact. So, you know, when we're talking about the food we serve at the conference, I didn't say we're serving food waste. I said we're serving rescued food or surplus food or something. So, you know, that's definitely one. But are there other places where we need to be cautious to make sure that in this moment where so many people care about these issues, we're really building on the energy from the two communities and not stepping on each other's toes? So I'll let you, any of you, whoever wants to jump in first, well, maybe we'll get some answers, and then we'll start taking the audience questions.
I'll jump in quickly and then defer to those smarter than me. That I had a lot of learnings out in the community when I'd go out and first start talking about expired code dates, because my original plan was to sell product past its code date, because I knew from my years in grocery that that was not a food safety issue. that was a display code. And it was like swimming up Niagara Falls. That if the press hated anything about the idea of Daily Table, that's what they hated. If the community was nervous about anything, that's what they were nervous about. And the second thing was when they started calling particularly expired food, and then that got tied, of course, to food waste. And that was my big learning out in the community and talking with people in Boston and around the country, that nobody in America wants a second helping of food waste. That stories matter, and what we call things really matters. And so that was where, again, from my own experience, like, well, most of this stuff is really wasted food. And I think that when we started talking about, we're going to go get that excess, healthy, nutritious food, and actually specifically here in Boston, I started talking about, any of you guys ever shop at TJ Maxx? And a whole bunch of hands went up. And I'd say, a large percentage of what they sell is, quote, excess clothing or expired clothing. It's last year's season something. So, but yet they offer it at great discounts, and they're recovering this so it doesn't go to a landfill. But you feel great when you go to a TJ Maxx, you get this great deal. We would love to be that in food. Recover this stuff that's healthy and nutritious and offer it. And I do think that particular languaging really matters a lot.
Can I just build on that, but also kind of contradict what I also said? We're in that sort of gray area. When we talk about wasted food, clearly we want to focus on the nutrient value of that in terms of being able to get it to people to consume it. But I think where another tension is within the food industry, this food is categorized as food waste. And in order to get attention and really focus on action, we have to be comfortable sharing that we have food waste in our system, which is going out as food waste, and being able to say that that's a part of business. No retailer is going to purchase exactly the right amount of food to be able to have for their customers to buy, and no production company is going to produce. I mean, I was in marketing for years. If I could have had produced perfectly, I would have been a success, but the dynamics of the ultimate consumer are unpredictable. So I think we have to be very comfortable saying that within the food production system, there is food waste, and being able to be transparent and say in a non-competitive way that we farmers want to figure out a way to be able to capture this wasted food that's in our fields. How can we work together to create the infrastructure to package it, distribute it, freeze it, or whatever? At the manufacturer perspective, we all have this ends and pieces or undistributable, unsellable food waste that's hitting our bottom line as a cost. How can we collaborate to be able to share learning and best practices to put the infrastructure and support the infrastructure to be able to convert it? I mean, this happens across the entire spectrum. I mean, our partnership with Starbucks is a really cool example of them stepping up and saying, you know what, we do have food waste in our stores. We are throwing this out, and it's driving our employees and everyone else crazy. So how can we invest in being able to make a difference, and then them wanting to bring partners to the table? I mean, they're out there saying, we have this food waste that we want to be wasted food to get to people. So I think that's the nuance of the language that we have to get really comfortable in public with.
So I will just ask Emily to address your question. I actually don't think that if well understood that there's an either-or kind of proposition, but sometimes things are not well understood, So, and so I would say that there needs to be not only a unified approach by government and unified messaging to change, to bring about the change that we want, but it's really a multi- sectoral kind of approach that we need to have alignment with others, so.
All right. We have questions coming in from the audience. So here's one I think follows on with what we're talking about. This question's about what can we do about food that is unhealthy, that is being collected? And, I think Doug touched on one angle, which might be around having nutrition guidelines for some of that food. But I think also it might be thinking about kind of up the chain, being able to send signals if we're overproducing things that are unhealthy. So I didn't know if Karen wanted to comment, or Doug Moore, or anyone on that comment about making sure it's not that we're, let's say especially as people's eating habits change with new dietary guidance and new health guidance, is all the leftover food going to be less healthy, and then that's going to wind up in people's homes?
Yeah, this is one that we get a lot. And this is, our position is, this isn't, nutrition isn't an issue that is for the food insecure. Nutrition is an American diet issue. The reality is the food that is rescued to be able to help feed the communities that are food insecure is a direct reflection of what's being produced for and consumed by the American public. So I really don't like when people step in and say, but we want to distribute only healthy food to those who are food insecure. Who am I to say that just because you've lost your job, you can't have a brownie or a Twinkie or a cupcake or a birthday cake? I want to be able to promote client dignity and make sure that consumers have a choice. Now, that being said, it's incumbent upon the entire community to be bringing nutritious choices to food insecure families, but that's the same responsibility that we have to bring to the grocery stores for the American public. Doug said earlier that the face of the food insecure person is obesity. So's the face of the American public. So sorry, I could go on and on about that one, but that's sort of where we come from.
And I'd like to give a counterpoint of view on that a bit, which is I absolutely understand that, and having been in retail for a lot of years, thought that we're an economic democracy. We open the doors and customers come vote with their dollars, and we're not here to dictate what they should and shouldn't do. But I personally am probably a contrarian in this room, but I'm not happy that SNAP actually covers sugar water and processed food. And I'm not happy that obesity isn't equally distributed throughout all the economic and so we do have, instead, a serious responsibility, in my opinion, to make our very best effort to make sure that what we are distributing is going to move them forward and not backward, and that cookies and donuts and brownies and gummy bears are a treat. But unfortunately, if they're coming out in a box of food, that may be what you eat for your caloric thing instead of what you need. And so I would just say that I think we have a responsibility to push the envelope to make certain we're doing our very best to have healthy outcomes for a population that can't afford. In my neighborhood, if Bill Gates wants to eat, a bad diet, he's not food insecure. And most of us in this room are not food insecure. And some of us, like myself, may be not recovering chocoholics. But I think those are personal decisions that are different than a societal sort of challenge of obesity, rising, skyrocketing diabetes in a population that's economically challenged. So I just think that it's too easy an answer to say, oh, we'll just distribute it and let them choose. And I know for a fact, I just want to now say that, Feeding America and the Greater Boston Food Bank, which I'm unburdened by facts of most food banks. Greater Boston Food Bank, I know, works hard to distribute product in line with nutritional guidelines. And I think 75 or 80% of what they distribute out meets all of those guidelines in every distribution.
67% across our network.
So 67%. The challenge is that means a third of what you're sending out, they probably shouldn't be eating. And that to me is a challenge.
Agreed. And that's why we put huge resources against sourcing more. Yeah. That's why our focus is on the Starbucks partnership for their nutritious food, on the ag sector for capturing food that's left in the field as well as in the production facilities. It's clearly but that's where it takes partnerships, because that's the challenging, that's the expensive part. New question.
Yeah, well, I think that was a great discussion. I'm sorry, we're bringing up some of these tough questions, but I think, again, this is a great way to kick off the 2 days and be talking about this. So here's a couple questions that came from Maddie, so I'll put you on the hot seat now. So the questions are sort of along the lines of, 50% is a really big number. Someone says, good luck. But the question is sort of, can you name a few things that you think are part of the goals to get there, maybe the top 2 or 3 things? And then someone else asked something about, could there be some sort of executive order around, getting to that 50% reduction? So any answer you have on top things that you think need to be done at the federal level?
Well, I mean, actually, we were having a conversation early this morning about that. So the whole intention of this call to action is really reflect the best practices that have been achieved in the business sector, have been achieved in the public sector. So the question is not if, but how do you scale it up? We know the most profit-oriented businesses have been able to demonstrate the business case and show not just break even, but increase in profit from doing so. So the challenge for us, I think 50% is achievable, right? And we've seen the tremendous results. And if you look at the call to action, the tremendous results from the cases, and some of the business leaders will talk about that. So it's about scaling it up. I do think the challenge is scale up and measuring success. Because frankly, I think that those are either under-informed about that or going to be skeptical, whether in the business sector or government sector. Would local governments invest in education at the consumer level? That you're going to meet that skepticism. So I think it's important for us to collectively build a package of information to speak to these various audiences. But it is going to take regular engagement. The conversation we're having this morning, how do we institutionalize something? That something could be, what is the unified federal government approach? What is the message to state and local governments? And what is the platform of sharing among businesses? And sometimes businesses who are competing in a pre-competitive way, so.
And actually, to follow up to that, a couple people asked about what can be done at the local level and I guess state level too. So if you want to comment, or others, I mean, we have people here from all levels of government at this conference, and I'm hoping actually in the working groups we've sort of broken out to ask them talk about things that can be done at the federal level, but there's a lot that can be done at the state and local level that the federal government can't do or shouldn't do or wouldn't do well. So maybe if anyone can share a couple ideas of things that either you've seen that have been effective, state and local, or ideas that you think could be addressed.
Sure. I think Monica Munn and Dana of NRDC are going to be talking about the city's initiatives. So I think that I'll let them speak about it, kind of the work on the city. I think this huge, the organic policies that are aligned, and I say aligned, or organic policies that are misaligned, could result in the upper echelon of the hierarchy working, or we just compost. Right? So there's some critical decisions on infrastructure that will drive where you are in the hierarchy. So it's really important for that to happen. So, and the states can really influence those choices working with the federal government. So.
I would just say that the beauty of the local policies is that they really can be tailored to the community in which they're involved. I mean, we've seen some success with the landfill ban in Vermont. That's where the infrastructure exists or is being built to be able to support that local policy. On a national or federal basis, it's hard to do that because each community is very different. But being able to encourage donation as opposed to putting green waste into landfill is the right thought process. It just gives it the ability to really match the need, match the community opportunity as well as the need.
Here's another question that's actually kind of a tough one. So I know, sorry. This is, do you think the cheapness of food contributes to wastage? And if so, how do we deal with it? And the reason I think it's good for this panel is because it gets back to the same question about, we don't want food to cost more and wind up with more people being food insecure and needing to use emergency food resources. But on the flip side, in a country where we spend less per capita on food than any country ever in the world, obviously it doesn't hurt people, businesses and individuals when they throw food away. Who wants to jump in?
So I missed the first part of that question.
The question was, I'll read it for you. Do you think that the cheapness of food contributes to wastage? And if so, how do we deal with that? So the cost of food.
I don't think there's any question that it does. And I think that, the fact that from the time I started at Trader Joe's in the 70s till when I graduated, that the cost of food to the average American household dropped a third. just in that time, dropped a third. And much of the challenge has been the fact that we have so many options that are calorically dense but nutritionally poor that are incredibly cheap. So I've often said and gotten into, let's say, warm discussions about this regarding the fact I think that people act economically rationally when they are feeding their families with, junk food because that's the only caloric intake they can afford. And you can't ask them to step up and do, eat better and do more when the food that's so cheap is the stuff that they can afford, but it's not what's good for them. So I think it is a real factor. I think that part of it is, I'd love to see a farm bill that truly was designed around nutrient delivery instead of caloric delivery.
So, I guess I will posit, that's the reality, but, behavioral economists have done lots of studies about, well, how do you tip that, right? So, the fact is that what people are throwing, how many people can throw away $1,500 a year? If you do, just give me that, right?
We'll collect it.
And behavioral economists have really talked about information, the environmental case is important, the hunger case is important. That's not going to drive the case. It's the economic value added proposition to a family and to a business that's going to drive it, right? So I think these are helpful, but, so I think that we could turn around that cheapness argument to say there is value added proposition of saving families money and businesses, again, $161 billion, I think, last year in cumulative loss, so.
Yeah, and I would just add that that's particularly true at the consumer level, right? Throughout the food production supply chain, I think it's a little less true because a farmer isn't leaving food in the ground because it's cheap. He's invested in that the same amount that he's invested in the product that gets sold. So I just want to be a little bit cautious about that statement, which is very true once it gets to the consumer level.
So I'll just, the REFED study does a really good job. So in the developed world, majority of food loss is post-farm, it's production and consumer. In the developing world, it's difficult challenges of getting to the distribution system. So the greatest opportunity is at the production, is at the consumer level. So.
All right. Continuing with their tough questions. So this one's sort of directed to Maddie, but I'll let everyone jump in. And there's a few questions we got that are talking about how we can better balance composting and the top two levels of the hierarchy that we're talking about. I guess really the second one more. How do we balance investment with composting and anaerobic digestion, that infrastructure, with efforts to make sure that as much food that's recovered for people can be. So there are a couple people. One of them gave a specific example of places like this one was about to meet LEED certified goals for buildings, you have to compost a certain amount. So there's things like that where we might have incentives to compost that actually businesses feel like they have to compost it instead of donating, even if they know it's perfectly good. So I didn't know if, Maddie, you want to jump in, or anyone else wants to jump in on how we can kind of get a better balance between the levels of that hierarchy.
Well, yeah, I think it's probably a multi-pronged. I mean, if you're thinking of trying to influence a city budget, and I've had the experience of trying to influence New York City's budget on this issue, which is very, very easy. I mean, frankly, council members have very lean staff, and they don't really have the expertise, in many cases, to make an informed decision. I'm not calling anyone out, that's just the facts, right? So what tends to happen, the vendors on infrastructure tend to be, so there's a skewing towards hard infrastructure rather than the informed policy choices. So let's take composting infrastructure versus investment in education. Investment in education will always lose because there's no champion, nor is there a view as a value-added proposition. So I think there is a way of putting a package. The composting has its place, but composting in isolation can then have the negative effect of recovery, right? So I think there are things that we can do.
I think that's great conversation around infrastructure needs to be built in terms of composting and to be able to support communities. But I think when we talk about recovery for donation and feeding the food insecure, I think we need better utilization of the resources that we do have. It's really difficult to build a processing facility to take peaches to make it into salsa where we can use the Campbell's pilot plant to be able to do that, because it exists and it sits idle sometimes. It's just being creative around timing to be able to find availability. One of the things that we're doing at the Feeding America Network is that we haven't been really good at using our network of 200 brick and mortar warehouses when we think about rescuing produce. We tend to bring in full truckloads because that's the most efficient way to bring product in, but it's very difficult for some food banks to move a high volume, a whole truckload of corn or whatever the product is. So we are expanding a pilot that was tried in Minneapolis and a couple other places that are to become mixing centers, to bring in full truckloads and then to quickly break them down and redistribute to the smaller food banks a mix of beans, corn, I don't know, I'm going to get my crops all confused, but whatever's coming in at the same time so that we can quickly move product out, and that allows access to higher volume. But so that took a new thought process from our perspective, because each food bank is very much like, this is what I do and this is my service area. But now if we think about collaboration outside our brick and mortar walls, how do we create this opportunity to move more produce that would have stayed in the field? The green bean example I gave is another one where that particular producer is using his infrastructure, modifying a little bit, but being able to change without totally new investment, which might be needed in composting, but it's something that's a minor expense in terms of being able just to divert waste into wasted food, yeah.
So I'd like to add just a little something to, I think it's a great contribution here. I think that from a retail standpoint, a lot of retailers either don't know or use liability as an issue. Composting, no liability issues. Food recovery, I'm going to get sued. I mean, you know, what happens? So I think we need to do a much better job on clarifying the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act with the recent enhancements that were done. I think that we also need to educate that. I know we have all seen ad nauseum the pyramid. I'm not sure everybody in America knows that. You walk out and ask a person on the street, they're going to think composting, that rocks, that's number one. And I think though there's a bunch of education around liability, and then around that pyramid. Just knowing that, hey, maybe that isn't the best use. It's better than landfill for sure. It's good, but here's even better. We need to call ourselves to a higher use.
I will say on that note, please use the composting bins properly at the meals. We saw a lot of.
But eat as much food first.
Eat as much as you can and properly use the compost bins. I'm going to ask one other question, which is to Doug, and then if everyone, I don't know if you want to say anything else that we've left out, and then we'll kind of close up. So for Doug, you got a bunch, so I want to kind of, most of them are really around how are you going to assess the success of Daily Table. And also, do you have any report or findings or something that people can read and kind of better understand what you've done, what challenges and opportunities, or there's some homework for you?
No, absolutely. For that $1,500 that's being spent, you'll send that to me. We'll get you a 1 year in review report. It's 4-color, it's glossy. You'll be really proud for the money well spent. So the question of outcomes and impacts is a tough one for all nonprofits. And whether you're the Gates Foundation or your Daily Table, the measuring of societal outcomes is a tricky one. We don't have the resources to fund that, but more importantly, Rand Corp, which offered us a large grant before we opened to come test and measure and see if we could, our population, we chose not to, because one of the things that came through loud and clear in the community meetings we had, dozens of community meetings we had in Dorchester, we don't want to feel we're part of your experiment. We don't want to feel we're part of a project. We don't want to feel like we're going to get prodded and poked and measured. And this all came out of my idea originally of, hey, and we're going to have like Healthy Saturdays. We'll have someone from Common Square Health Center here to measure your weight and take your blood pressure. And it's like, what? No, we just want to come grocery shopping. Like, no, we don't want to be reminded of some negative, like we've got a health problem or we're obese or we have high blood pressure. No, don't do that. We don't want to feel we're part of your project. So we had to step back and go, okay, in this particular instance, we're going to take output as outcome. In a community that doesn't waste money on food, And quite frankly, of all the 350 Trader Joe's stores I had the opportunity to be involved with, this community that I'm in now knows pricing more than anyone I've ever seen, because it matters to them so much more. So as I said, our idea of success will be one, do we hit a scalable, do we hit financial break even on an operational basis as a nonprofit and then can hence be scalable? Are we able to recover and utilize the food? Because without that, we can't get our cost of goods down. And then finally, can we get a change in dietary usage in the community? And I actually think that many of the people that we have come in and pushed their neighbors. They've convinced their neighbors to come in. They'll come in and say, my neighbor tells me I got to get down here inside, I'm going to try this food. And so we're starting to see that the best word of mouth and ambassador we have is our existing members who are telling the people, why are you wasting your money on that? Go down to Daily Table. You can get some good tasting, good stuff. And it's cheaper than going across the street to the nameless fast food spot. And so I think that to us, it's maybe not a satisfying answer. I'd love to be able to come back and do this in a deeper way. And one of the ways in which we're looking at, Bowdoin Geneva has a health center. They offer Daily Table dollars to the people that were pre-diabetic that had a problem, and they would issue these out, and they'd only be redeemable for food at Daily Table. So they're tracking and measuring at that level. So I think if a health center like Codman Square Health Center did a Healthy RX program, then we could have them be the ones tracking it instead of us and kind of push that off onto someone else.
So any last closing remarks from
So
anyone?
again, my pitch to you all is, the collective, we try to reflect the best ideas and the best practices in the call to action that was posted yesterday. And so, to the question of how do you make the 50% goal real? So this is the first step of making it real. The next step is, what commitments can you all make to be the leader of your sector or your group? And how can we be most disruptive between now and the fall? So I would like to have another culminating something. You could even opine about what that something is, to have greater resonance of the specific actions that we all can take. Even if it means EPA should just shut up, that's okay too. Okay.
Just to build on those comments, I do think that each of us have a responsibility to go back to the sectors where we come from and continue this awareness, excitement, engagement building. One of the things that we've also done differently is we are now hosting in September our second annual food, let me get this right, Wasted Food Rescue Summit. There we go. We got the words down. Wasted Food Recovery Summit, which for the first time for Feeding America as a leader in the sector is bringing together all of the other sister rescue organizations. There's several that are here that joined us last year, and we hope to expand the invitation for this year to really take the groups that are focused on this top of the hierarchy, share best practices, share safe food handling guidelines, share innovative ideas, and really be able to work together to make a larger impact. Do that in your sector too, and really be open to sharing successes, because I think that's the piece that inspires others to do something and not just talk.
All right, with that, will you join me in thanking this panel for being such good sports?